Recording in progress. So welcome everybody to MAP's program with Martha Stark. I am so excited to introduce Dr. Martha Stark, even though a lot of you probably know her already a little bit. But just for formality, Martha is a graduate of Harvard Medical School and the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute. She's a holistic psychiatrist and psychoanalyst in private practice in Boston, Massachusetts. She's currently on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, co-founder and co-director at the Center for Psychoanalytic Studies, faculty at Psychiatry Redefined, and adjunct faculty at William James College and Smith College of Social Work. She also teaches at lots of other institutions and institutes. And she has written 9 highly acclaimed books on psychoanalytic theory and technique. That's how we know her the best. So without further ado, take it away, Martha.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? And now I'm going to try to share my screen and let's see, fingers crossed. Pray for me, please. Can you see that?
Yep.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. All right. So let me just get things situated here. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I'm thrilled and deeply appreciative. We have a lot of material to cover, but you do have PDFs of these slides. And there will be, it's not here yet, but there will be an 18-page clinical interventions guide that you will be getting. I promise it's still kind of in process. It's not quite done yet. So buckle your seatbelts and here we go. Practical clinical interventions incentivizing change. All right. That was me busy preparing these PowerPoint slides. And people who know me know that I absolutely adore the minions. I mean, some people love cars or computers or whatever, kiteboarding, pickleball. I love the minions. All right. So learning objectives. Summarize the reason that optimal stress, in other words, just the right balance between anxiety-provoking challenge and anxiety-assuaging support, provides both impetus and opportunity for deep and enduring psychodynamic change. Compose a minimally stressful statement that supports by joining the defense. Explain how these minimally stressful interventions featured during the beginning game set the stage for the therapeutic action that will follow. Construct an optimally stressful statement that alternately challenges and then supports the defense. And describe how these optimally stressful interventions featured during the middle game create growth incentivizing mismatch experiences, the working through of which will advance the patient from rigid defense to more flexible adaptation. So I've kind of given you this sort of umbrella overview, and then we're really going to nail down more specifics. I have no financial conflicts of interest, or as Eric Plaken would say, perhaps I have psychological conflicts, but no financial conflicts. So my psychodynamic synergy paradigm, again, for some of you, so yep. And for others of you, But anyway, so very briefly, before we get into some more material. So my psychodynamic synergy paradigm is a CARE, C-A-R-E approach to deep healing: cognitive, affective, relational, existential. So model 1, the interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalysis, more cognitive. It privileges, that's a very ostentatious word, but anyway, it privileges cognitive. Model 2, the corrective provision perspective of self-psychology, and that privileges affect. Model 3, the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory, and that privileges relational. And finally, model 4, an existential humanistic approach to mending brokenness and easing despair. And approach really does have 2 P's in it, but you wouldn't know that from the way I wrote it. And I always say about model 4 that the reason I finally figured out that I needed model 4 is because my dear friend Larry Hedges made me do a model 4. If model 1 is structural conflict, model 2 is structural deficit, model 3 is relational conflict, a la Stephen Mitchell, then model 4, yes, is relational deficit. In any event, oh, and let me say, model one, I sort of learned about in the 70s, the classical psychoanalytic approach. Model two, self-psychology, I kind of learned about in the 80s. So I made that my model two. Model three, in the 90s, I was being exposed to the contemporary relational theorists, Jessica Benjamin and Owen Rennick and Darlene Ehrenberg and Jay Greenberg and Stephen Mitchell and the William Alanson White Institute. So that became my model three. And then in that decade between 2000 and 2010, I sort of like my eyes were open to a more existential humanistic approach, and thus my model four. There is also model five and eventually a model six and eventually a model seven, depending upon how many more decades I live. But for now, the focus here will be on these first four psychodynamic models. So therapeutic modalities that have deep and enduring psychodynamic change as their ultimate goal. For example, psychoanalysis and other depth psychologies, including, but not limited to, ACT, IFS, EMDR, ISTDP, AEDP, EFT, also the other EFT, NLP, sensory motor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, and psychomotor psychotherapy, to name a few. These modalities must ultimately, big picture, be able to transform psychological rigidity into psychological flexibility, in the evocative words of acceptance and commitment therapy, and low-level defense into higher level or more evolved defense, in the more traditional words of psychoanalysis and ego psychology, such that the patient, whatever her starting point, whatever her initial level of functionality, whatever her diagnosis, this isn't about diagnosis at all. You will see as we go through this, it's so not about diagnosis. So it's just wherever the patient is in that moment, whatever the issues are with which she's struggling, whatever kind of rigidity she has instead of flexibility. Anyway, so therapeutic modalities ultimately to transform rigidity into flexibility such that the patient will become ever better able over time to manage the myriad stressors in her life to which she is being continuously exposed, ever more adept at responding adaptively and mindfully instead of reacting defensively and mindlessly. The ultimate goal of deep treatments, ever less psychological rigidity, ever more psychological flexibility. Carl Jung, I'm not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. So we're talking about flexibility and resilience and adaptability, not rigidity, not same old, old, bad, disempowered, but rather something new, different, and better, more empowered, more flexible, more resilient. So indeed, the therapeutic action in all four of my psychodynamic models, classical psychoanalytic, self-psychological, contemporary relational, and existential humanistic, does indeed involve all four. And they are mutually interdependent and mutually enhancing and interdependent. All four, the therapeutic action does indeed involve advancement or evolving of the patient through iterative healing cycles of disruption in reaction to challenge and repair in response to support, challenge and support being critically important words here, from rigid defense to more flexible adaptation, or from same old narratives, old, bad, disempowering narratives, to something new, different, and better. So from the sobering and conditioned reality of what is to the enlivening and quantum possibility of what could be. Okay, so in my four models, the cognitive approach in model one, from resistance, classical psychoanalysis, to, it would have been insight, but insight doesn't start with an A, and the adaptations have to start with the letter A, so it's going to be awareness. The defenses you'll see start with R, and the adaptations start with the letter A. So model one, a cognitive approach that will focus on interpreting, interpreting. And I'm really going to be giving you a lot of examples here. Model 2, this is the overview for now, from relentless hope, which is the defense, that's sort of my term there, to sober, mature acceptance that it was what it was and is what it is. This is a more affective approach that focuses on grieving. Being with the patient where they are, yes, but ultimately facilitating their grieving of disillusionment. The experience of good become bad, or illusion become disillusionment. Model 3, the relational approach, this one from reenactment, compulsive and unwitting reenactment of unmastered, unresolved early on relational traumas, to accountability on the parts of both patient and therapist, because model 3 is about mutual enactments, transference, countertransference, entanglements, projective identification, and in the words of Darlene Ehrenberg, negotiating at, and her words, at the intimate edge, back to my words, of relatedness, and ultimately, right, facilitating transformation of reenactment into accountability. And finally, model 4, from relational absence to authentic presence, or we could say from retreat to accessibility or availability. And this is an existential approach that focuses on surrendering. And more recently, I've been exposed to Ofra Eshel's work. She's an Israeli psychoanalyst on analytic oneness. And so we're talking about surrendering to the experience of analytic oneness between patient and therapist. Or in the words of Masood Khan, the goal is to help the patient overcome their dread of surrender to resourceless dependence on absolute to resources dependence on the therapist. And Michael Balint talks about a blissful state of peaceful merger or interpenetrating mix-up. In those moments when the patient is retreating, that's what we would want to have happen. Because again, the patient, though they may primarily be one or another of these models, they're also ever busy shifting back and forth between these different models. Lao Tzu. I'm not pronouncing it right, but you know what I mean. So when I let go of the defensive, same old that I am, I become the adaptive, something new, different, and better that I might be. Okay, so the patient's continuously shifting points of emotional urgency will inform the therapist's choice of the model or models that will be most relevant moment to moment for understanding the patient's underlying psychodynamics, and for then selecting the approach that will be most useful. Model 1, when they are, I mean, I know I'd said I'm not really going for diagnoses, but for now, since so many people say, well, but wouldn't that be more neurotic? Okay, so, all right, so neurotic conflictedness, we're going to be using conflict statements to highlight their internal conflictedness, their neurotic conflict, their intrapsychic conflict, their ambivalence, ultimately. Model 2, we're talking about narcissistic, I never know whether to say woundedness or vulnerability, either or injury, but narcissistic issues. We'll use disillusionment statements to facilitate grieving of their disillusionment, their disappointments, their frustrations, their losses. And again, model 2 is about relentless hope, where they're refusing to confront and grieve the reality of the objects, limitations, separateness, and immutability. Model 3, noxious relatedness. So you'll notice all of these points of emotional urgency start with the letter N. All right, so model 3, noxious relatedness, and now accountability statements will be relevant to facilitate negotiating the negotiation of mutual enactments at the intimate edge of relatedness, Darlene Ehrenberg. And model 4, non-relatedness. Arne Modell talks about affective non-relatedness. Now we use facilitation statements to highlight the patient's need, fear, yearning and longing, terror of engagement with the world of objects, the world with life itself. So how are defenses and adaptations here being defined? Let me move through this quickly. Please note, I do not limit defenses to the well-known and more traditional ones. At one end of the continuum, low-level defenses, for example, the ones we all know: dissociation, displacement, projection, isolation of affect, reaction formation. And at the other end, higher level or more mature defenses that are more adaptive and more socially acceptable. For example, sublimation, humor, altruism, humility. Rather, I define defenses more broadly as speaking to any of the self-protective mechanisms that we mobilize when made anxious in the face of stressors. Stressors and stress are tremendously important in this whole sort of perspective here, whether it's traumatic stress or optimal stress or minimal stress or no stress. But anyway, stressors relevant here, and how the patient, oh, here we go. So stressors, whether psychological, physiological, and or energetic. So now we have at one end of the continuum, what happens reflexively, knee-jerk reflex, when we are confronted with stressors that are too much. I always have to go up on my toes to say that, but that overwhelm us with anxiety, to which I refer as low-level defenses or rigid defenses. And at the other end, what happens more reflectively, not reflexive, but more mindfully, more reflectively, when we're confronted with stressors that we are more easily able to take in our stride, to which I refer as higher level defenses, more evolved or more flexible adaptations. So at one end of the continuum, defensive conditioned reactions, and at the other end, adaptive, resilient responses. Either we, made anxious, react to stressors by mindlessly defending, defensive reaction, or we, more resilient, respond to stressors by more mindfully adapting, adaptive response. And it's moment by moment. And as we sit with our patients, it's important that we be attuned to whether or not they are made too anxious and get defensive, or whether or not they can more easily take something in their stride and more easily then adaptively respond to it. But the relationship here, important to say, between defense and adaptation is, of course, a yin-yang relationship. These self-protective mechanisms, because they both are complementary, not opposing forces. Furthermore, all defenses have an adaptive component. Yes, 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 of course, just as all adaptations serve a defensive function. Nonetheless, and more generally, although defenses might once have been necessary for the patient to survive, as rigid defenses become upgraded to more flexible adaptations, the patient becomes ever better able to thrive. The therapeutic action is indeed designed to transform rigidity into flexibility and surviving into thriving, from surviving to thriving. So the working through process in psychodynamic psychotherapy. So the working through process, 3 stages, or if I could be a little Freudian, I have a tripartite model here. So 3 stages that are both repetitious and progressive, because I'm going to be highlighting that we keep running through this cycle again and again: beginning game, middle game, end game, beginning game, middle game, end game. So we're going to be thinking ascending spiral staircase. So as repetitious and progressive, ever evolving. So the beginning game, minimally stressful interventions, and I'm going to be presenting a lot of them to you, that tease out the various defenses, the recurring and problematic themes, patterns, and repetitions, in order to identify the players and set the stage for the therapeutic action that will follow. Then we have the middle game, optimally stressful interventions that alternately challenge, which will make the patient more anxious, but then support the defense, which will make the patient less anxious, in order to create growth incentivizing, destabilizing mismatch experiences. And every time I write mismatch experiences, I'm going to put quotes around it because it's that important. And then the end game, no stress interventions. And this so rarely gets named in the literature. And Marlene Way helped me to sort of get this part nailed down. These no stress interventions that celebrate and applaud adaptive resolution, even if only temporary and or makeshift. And as some of my people know, with my patients and my supervisees and my students, I just stand up and applaud. And at this point, my patients often stand up and applaud themselves. Sometimes we both stand up and we're both applauding. And it's a good feeling. So celebrate and applaud adaptive resolution. But then the knowing, even if only temporary and or makeshift, so it's a sort of good enough for the time being, because the sequence will probably need to be repeated again and again, repetitious and progressive, up the ascending spiral staircase until with landings, until the problematic issue has been more thoroughly processed, integrated, and adapted to. So my dear sweet Gunnar reminded me that there's a shampoo. It says wash, rinse, and repeat. So I'd like to suggest minimal stress, optimal stress, and repeat. Okay, so the working through process, the middle game. With the stage having already been set during the beginning game with the minimally stressful interventions, and against the backdrop of empathic resonance, but of course, between patient and therapist, and a working alliance, a therapeutic alliance. The therapist will repeatedly, and this is the actual working through process, the middle game in a psychodynamic psychotherapy where deep and enduring change is the ultimate goal. And again, as I often say, one of my mentors had said, if the patient asks you where the bathroom is, you can tell them, but don't call that therapy. All right, so the therapist will repeatedly, whenever possible, I mean, you don't just do it every sentence out of your mouth, but the therapist will repeatedly, whenever possible, offer the patient optimally stressful interventions. And I'm going to be presenting a lot of those. Just the right combination, as I'd said, of anxiety-provoking challenge and anxiety-assuaging support. And again, we want to be, as therapists, having our fingers ever on the pulse of the level of the patient's anxiety, and using that then to help us sort of decide whether we can be a little more forward or we need to backpedal and back off a little bit. The ultimate goal being sort of just the right balance between support and challenge, between too much anxiety and not enough anxiety. And you know, I mean, how do we ever know what we should be doing? By just being very attuned to the level of their anxiety. If they get really defensive, or if they seem to be more able in the moment, it's moment by moment, to take what you've just said in their stride by the time you're done with your optimally stressful intervention. So these statements, optimally stressful interventions, I call them interventions. Most of them are statements. I don't really say interpretation because I just feel like I don't want to. But anyway, optimally stressful interventions, strategically designed to generate destabilizing internal dissonance and homeostatic imbalance. So these are not designed to create tension between patient and therapist, but rather to generate destabilizing internal tension and homeostatic imbalance, accomplished by juxtaposing, and juxtaposing is an important word here, anxiety-provoking challenge of the defense with anxiety-assuaging support of it, either directly or indirectly, whether explicitly or implicitly, whether verbally or non-verbally, but in essence, to be juxtaposing the this and the that. And I mean, in the moment, you might want to be thinking about way back in the 1940s, Alexander and French talked about the corrective emotional experience, which involved the juxtaposition of old bad, relational expectation of being failed, and new good, something new, different, and better. So this is, you know, this has sort of been around for some time, the idea of juxtaposing something not so good with something maybe a little bit better. And thank you, Hannah Levinson, again, for highlighting. It might well be something not so good with something a little bit better, or something not so good with something quite a bit better, thereby creating growth incentivizing mismatch experiences, again in quotes, the ongoing working through of which, in order to resolve the internal tension and restore the homeostatic balance, will incrementally advance the patient to ever higher and ever more evolved levels of resilience and adaptive capacity. Strategic leveraging of the patient's anxiety, yes, strategic. I do mean strategic, alternately increasing it by challenging the defense, increasing the anxiety, and then decreasing it by supporting or joining the defense. And when you support it, it doesn't mean that you say, yes, yes, I agree, you're doing the right thing. It's the more sort of self-psychological, empathic, or in Salman Akhtar's words, being with the patient where they are. And you take yourself out of it. It's not about what you think or sort of like, well, yeah, that's good what you're saying, but rather you resonate with, empathically resonate with what they're saying, and you understand in a very profound and deep way. So you're alternately challenging it and then supporting it. Or you can support and then challenge, whatever, but you ultimately do both to generate these growth incentivizing, destabilizing mismatch experiences. That's a mismatch experience. That's a mismatch experience, to be sure. The working through process is never about a simple straight line progression from defense to adaptation, from less evolved to more evolved. And I've already said ascending spiral staircase is one image here. Rather, working through is about the emergence of iterative healing cycles of destabilization and restabilization, defensive destabilization and adaptive restabilization at ever more evolved levels of resilience, complexity, and adaptive capacity. And some of you know that I also talk about the sandpile model of chaos theory, but that's getting us too far afield. So let's not worry about that for now. Okay, so nuanced phraseology, which is relevant throughout the process. And then we're going to be talking about minimally stressful interventions and then optimally stressful interventions. So here we go with nuanced phraseology. I just kind of came up with that, decided to call it that, as a prelude to learning about minimally stressful interventions, again, the word stressful, which will elicit little or no anxiety. So they are setting the stage, creating the backdrop. They're in the beginning game, identifying the various players, the recurring themes, patterns, and repetitions that are a little bit problematic and recurring and sort of old, bad, disempowering narratives, same old, whatever. Minimally stressful interventions, beginning game, and optimally stressful interventions, more the middle game. But now we're going to do nuanced phraseology, which is relevant from beginning to end. Okay, words matter. Okay, I love this one. You find yourself, and probably some of you are already just kind of doing this, but I want to spell out that you can say you find yourself when the patient is having an anxiety-provoking feeling, but having trouble acknowledging it. So you can say you find yourself feeling pretty angry right now, instead of you are feeling pretty angry right now. The therapist here is indirectly letting the patient off the hook a bit. That's okay, because you did get something said here by intimating that the patient's anger might well be something that has come upon her as if taken her by surprise, and therefore something for which she's not entirely responsible. And paradoxically, the patient might well then be more easily able to acknowledge the anxiety-provoking feeling. So again, you find yourself feeling, and then you'll see later when I talk about modifiers where you put in pretty angry right now, the temporal element right now, as opposed to you are feeling pretty angry right now. You would probably rather not. When the therapist says she knows that the patient would probably rather not be feeling what she's feeling, the therapist here too is indirectly letting the patient off the hook a bit, thereby perhaps making it a little easier for the patient then to acknowledge the anxiety-provoking feeling. And so we say, you would probably rather not be feeling angry, but even so, find yourself feeling pretty angry right now. And that way you've sort of acknowledged and appreciated that they're not loving it, that they're feeling angry, and you get that. So you don't just say you're feeling pretty angry right now, because no, they say no, not really. So you say you would probably rather not be feeling angry, but even so, find yourself feeling pretty angry right now, and they can then say, yeah, I'd really rather not be feeling angry, but even so, I mean, we've brought them into the territory of what they and we know really is their anger. All right, this is a simple one. I am realizing instead of I realize. I am realizing, for me anyway, feels more dynamic and suggests an ongoing process of evolving awareness on our part. Whereas I realize feels to me anyway, a little more static. And so when I offer an intervention, um, but anyway, yeah, I don't want to get into that. But anyway, so I am realizing it's a process that I'm in the moment. I'm realizing that. So I'm bringing it up to the present. It's more dynamic as opposed to I realize. Okay, the temporal element for now, at this point in time, right now, at this moment. Here, the therapist is using a little bit of subliminal stimulation to highlight the fact that perhaps at some later point in time, the patient might well be able to take healthier, more adaptive action instead of remaining defensively stuck. Even though you stopped loving your wife years ago, at this point in time, you can't imagine ever leaving her. Instead of, even though you stopped loving your wife years ago, you can't imagine ever leaving her. You can hear how at this point in time highlights that perhaps at another point in time, something might be different. And this sentence is especially relevant for someone on this call. So I just thought I would put that in there. All right. But it could be any one of 160 people. So there you go. All right. So nuanced phraseology. Every now and then, sometimes, perhaps, on some level, a little, maybe, possibly at times, a part of you, some part of you. The therapist can use qualifiers to limit the intensity of something that is anxiety provoking, thereby perhaps making it easier for the patient then to acknowledge it. Sometimes you find yourself feeling a little angry instead of you are feeling angry, or a part of you is enraged instead of you are enraged. Or every now and then, perhaps you find yourself feeling a little angry instead of you're feeling angry. So for example, you wouldn't say to a patient, you want to kill your mother. But you could probably accomplish just about the same thing by saying, perhaps there are times when you find yourself feeling, a part of you finds itself feeling that maybe it would be better off, you would be better off if your mother were simply no longer here. And they say, yeah, because that they can do. Whereas if you say, you want your mother dead, or even you want to kill your mother, that that's too much for them, go up on your toes, too much for them. And they'll say, no. All right, so this is an interesting one. I see instead of I hear. So the therapist makes explicit that she is a witness to what the patient is feeling. And I learned this from my studying with Al Peso back in the 1990s. He had a witness figure, and the witness figure would be witness to see. I see how much pain you are in. I see how desperately you want to get better. Note the subtle distinction between I see how lonely you are feeling and I hear how lonely you are feeling. For me anyway, and I think for Al Peso and the people who know psychomotor psychotherapy, the wonderful good people who trained with him, I see how sad you become when you talk about your mother and how she never understood. Versus, I hear how sad you become when you talk about your mother and how she never understood. It feels great to be able to know that how lonely and sad you are is being heard, but sometimes it's even more validating and reassuring to be able to know that how lonely and sad you are is being seen. Now, I know this speaks to perhaps the distinction between when during COVID, we were doing our patients, our people remotely, doing it by Zoom versus by telephone. And so this is where I should probably not be admitting that actually I do my patients by phone. So I probably should not have admitted that along with showing on how the patient, so I guess we're good. We're good here, Lottie. Anyway, to how the patient positions herself in relation to the traumas in her past and how she positions herself in her life. So one of the goals of which is cognitive fusion. One of the goals of which is to change the way the patient positions herself in relation to her thoughts. Cognitive diffusion promotes noticing the thought rather than getting caught up in or buying into the thought. So letting thoughts come and go rather than holding on to them. So diffusion, in essence, invites the patient to think about thinking and to realize that she is continuously verbally constructing her world. It is about not changing the thought, but relating differently to it, cognitive diffusion. So you might say, you're having the thought that you are broken. You are noticing that you're having the thought that you are broken. You find yourself thinking that you are broken. And I might want to add, you find yourself feeling that you are broken. I didn't put that, I should have. But so on another slide somewhere, which isn't in this slide deck, I do talk about affective diffusion and so on, but it's not here. So anyway, you could say you find yourself feeling that you are broken, all of which are designed to encourage development of the patient's reflecting self or observing ego. So more specifically, dual awareness, and that should be in quotes every time I say that, is being fostered when the patient is being asked to direct her attention to what she's experiencing in the moment, at the same time that she is being encouraged to step back from that experience in order to detach herself from it, recover therapeutic perspective, and reflect upon it. In the psychoanalytic literature, this distinction between experiencing something and observing it is described as a split in the ego between the experiencing or participating ego and the observing or reflecting ego. And of course, Richard Sturba way back in 1934, and then Leston Havens, a dear mentor of mine, more recently, may he rest in peace, but in his book, Participant Observation, which speaks directly to this. In any event, dual awareness is one of the goals of any treatment. Okay, as we shall later see, relevant for optimally stressful interventions designed to promote awareness, so model 1, are the impactful words, you know that, which highlight anxiety-provoking realities that the patient really does know, even if she would rather not. Remember, think conflictedness, internal conflictedness, neurotic conflictedness, ambivalence. So model 1. You know that I don't answer those kinds of questions, but you find yourself, defensively find yourself wishing that I did. Now, how do they know? You can't cheat. You can't say something they don't know. But how do you know that they know? Because you've been working together for some years and you've never answered those kinds of questions. So they do know that, even though they would rather not. So rather than saying, I don't answer those kinds of questions, you say, you know that I don't answer those kinds of questions, because again, in model 1 and with conflict statements and intrapsychic conflict, you want to keep it inside the patient and not between patient and therapist. So you want to be highlighting what they know and yet what they find themselves, where they find themselves wanting to go in order not to have to know. You know that you could ask your neighbor to keep his barking dog inside. This is relevant for me, but you find yourself hesitating for fear of getting him angry. Yeah. Instead of, you could ask your neighbor to keep his barking dog inside. You are not telling the patient what you know. Rather, you are insisting that the patient take ownership of what she knows, even if it makes her anxious. Also, as we shall later see, relevant for optimally stressful interventions, model 2, designed to facilitate the grieving of disillusionment, are the impactful words, you had hoped that. Strategic use of the, I learned this in 11th grade English, of the past perfect or pluperfect tense, had hoped. So not you hoped that, but you had hoped that. Highlights the reality that something the patient had been hoping for is becoming no longer a viable option. You had hoped. Can you feel that you're kind of putting it back there? Because you're trying to facilitate their grieving as they come to terms with the reality, some sobering realities about the limitations, separateness, and immutability of their frustrating objects that just are not delivering in the way that they would have wanted. But now we're trying to facilitate their grieving, facilitate their confronting and grieving the reality and evolving ultimately towards acceptance, which is the goal in Model 2, the corrective provision model. And of course, the cool thing about grieving is that as part and parcel of the grieving, there will be, so self-psychology tells us, and that's certainly been my experience as well, there will be then the adaptive, not defensive. You defensively introject, you adaptively internalize. The adaptive transmuting, which means structure building and capacity enhancing. Adaptive transmuting internalizations of self-object functions that the self-object had been performing prior to the disillusionment and even amidst the disillusionment, the good stuff that there really is there. So that's why grieving is so important, because part and parcel, there will be then adaptive transmuting internalization and then filling in deficit. And then being able to be self-soothing and self-parenting in a good way. All right. You had hoped that I would tell you what you should do. So the 3 parts. Oh, well, I don't want to get into that yet. So just you had hoped that. You had hoped that I would tell you what you should do. But you are beginning to realize that I don't simply offer advice. So now in the second part of a disillusionment statement, we're naming the reality. You are beginning to realize that I don't simply offer advice. They are beginning to get that because you're not giving advice. And they keep asking, relentlessly hopeful, hoping against hope that maybe someday, somehow, some way, if they can be persuasive enough and compelling enough in their arguing and coercive enough, they may get you to relent and to change. But anyway, you're beginning to realize that I don't simply offer advice. And the third part is, and that angers and upsets you terribly. Now you're resonating with the pain and anger and upset of their grief. You had hoped that your mother might someday apologize, but you're beginning to realize that probably she never will, and that breaks your heart. And you might well be saying this over and over and over again. And again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because these are Model 2 optimally stressful disillusionment statements to facilitate grieving. But anyway, here's the third one. I used this with one of my patients. You had hoped that your husband would ask you how your day had gone, but you're starting to realize that he never does and probably never will. And that realization is absolutely devastating. And again, you'll say this over and over and over again. These kinds of statements are designed to help the patient advance ultimately from relentless hope to sober, mature acceptance. Choose your words. Okay, so minimally stressful interventions, relevant for the beginning game, and they're not specific to any one of those 4 or 5 or 6 models. They're just specific to the beginning game as you're naming the various players. You want to be with the patient where she is, in the words of Salman Akhtar, and he calls that homeostatic attunement. Be with the patient where she is. Now, he makes a lovely distinction, and I'm going to present it here, but it's a little bit old-fashioned and a little bit old-fashioned and so on. But this is his example that he gives. So mother is home in the living room, maybe in a house dress for all we know. But anyway, mother is at home in the living room playing with the little baby and reading a little storybook to the baby. And the baby is cooing and cawing and it's fabulous. And they're both happy together. It's all good. Empathic resonance. It's all good. It's fabulous. And the mother is truly with the patient, with the little one, where the little one is. Father comes in from a long day at work. He comes in, he sees his little one, he kisses his wife, he sees his little one, and he picks up his little one and swoops the little one up into the air and swings the little one around, and the little one just, whoa, with delight and joy. That's called directing the patient's attention to elsewhere, but it's called disruptive attunement, but it's still attunement. And we will be doing, with our optimally stressful interventions, we'll be doing both homeostatic attunement, where we support, and disruptive attunement, where we challenge by directing their attention to where we would want them to go. So it's not just sort of off anywhere, sort of like, wow, what do you think about that book you were reading? But it's something that's particularly relevant for this juxtaposition experience that you're trying to create, the mismatch experience that you're trying to create. So these minimally stressful interventions, the beginning game, identifying the players, eliciting little or no anxiety, be with the patient where she is, homeostatic attunement. Okay, these are designed to elicit little or no anxiety. Not only do they support the patient, but they also advance the ball a bit by gently teasing out and bringing into focus some of the defensive and less than healthy recurring themes, habitual patterns, and conditioned repetitions in the patient's life. And we're going to go through these very quickly, but these are all sorts of different kinds of minimally stressful interventions that are relevant during the middle game in your work with anybody. All right. In other words, minimally stressful or clarifying interventions support by spotlighting, always with compassion and never with judgment, some of the, in Terry Reel's words, painful and difficult truths in the patient's life. And he calls this joining through the truth. So again, we get to elicit a little bit of anxiety. We get to elicit a little bit of anxiety. And so we're talking about joining through the truth by naming some of the painful and difficult truths in the patient's life. And I'm going to go on to give you some examples of that. And that's Terry Reel, who I'm grateful to him for that. Okay, integration statements. For those patients who are having trouble holding in mind simultaneously both the good and the bad aspects of their experience. In other words, patients with, and if you want, and if you're comfortable with this language, you could think, oh, borderlines. But in other words, although I think maybe that term is out of vogue and so on, but you can privately think it if you'd like. In other words, patients with tenuously established libidinal object constancy, we used to call it, or same thing, evocative memory capacity, meaning that in the moment of bad, they have trouble remembering the good. And in the moment of good, they can't remember that it had ever been bad or that it might ever be bad again. So because they can't hold in mind simultaneously both the good and the bad aspects of their experience. So these integration statements have hard to remember, hard to imagine figuring in them. And so you're basically resonating with their defense. So you say, when you're feeling this bad, it's hard to remember that you had ever felt good. And it's hard to imagine that you could ever feel good again, as opposed to, but you used to feel good and you could feel good again. No, you go with, it's hard to remember that you had ever felt good. So you're naming their defense against, right, that what we know, which is they had felt good. Here's one. When your heart is breaking as it is now, you can't imagine that you could ever dare to trust again. Or when you're feeling this angry at me, I've used this one a number of times, not always the same sentence. I never use the same sentence over again because every moment is different. When you're feeling this angry at me, it's hard to remember that you used to feel good about me and even looked forward to our sessions. So again, we don't just say, but you used to feel good about me. Why, just like last week, you were saying you'd never felt this understood before. Rather, you say, it's hard to remember that you used to feel good about me and even looked forward to our sessions. And finally, when you feel this despairing, you can't remember ever having had any hope whatsoever. And so they're going to feel deeply understood. But you've also highlighted, you snuck in a little something there. You mentioned the word hope, but you did it in a way that hopefully won't make them too defensive, maybe elicit a little anxiety, but that's okay. All right, now this is sort of a little different, but it deals with something similar. I call this two parts, both and statements. I just call it that. For those patients who are able to hold in mind both the good and the bad aspects of their experience, but are really ambivalent or conflicted about someone or something and are struggling, and they remember both and are struggling either to make a decision or to come to terms with simply being ambivalent. In other words, patients who are, and they know it, feeling two ways about an issue when both sides are reasonable enough options. So a part of you, another part of you. So you might say a part of you thinks all the time about stopping the affair, but another part of you is still enjoying every minute of it. See how much you get accomplished there? A part of you is profoundly disappointed, hurt, and angry at your husband, but another part of you does know that he is a man whom you deeply cherish, adore, and love, and they can then land wherever they want to. But they don't have to fight you, because I just not into extra fighting. Now, in model 3, negotiating at the intimate edge, Darling-Ehrenberg's intimate edge, the messiness and the turbulence that will arise in the intersubjective in between, that's sort of a different story, where they draw you into participating as some version of the old bad and so on. That's a little different. And then you might well be sort of going at it as part of a mutual enactment. That's model 3, and that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, a part of you is tempted to stop treatment because it costs so much. But another part of you knows that your therapy has been very helpful and that you might be making a huge mistake were you simply to quit right now. So again, you're not saying, but your therapy's been helpful, and you know, you'd be making a big mistake if you quit right now. You put it in them and you name these two parts. A part of you remains hurt, disappointed, and unforgiving. But another part of you is wanting desperately to find a way to forgive me. I've used that one. All right, so now here's a path of least resistance statement. And these are still minimally stressful, little or no anxiety, beginning game. For those patients who are reacting defensively rather than responding adaptively, you can go, in essence, easier to react defensively than to respond adaptively. And you do it carefully and gently. I mean, you don't slam them in the face with it. You're not trying to shame them or make them feel guilty or bad, but you can say something like, it's easier to give up than to keep fighting for what you really believe in. And the reason these, if you've got it right, they will sometimes a little bit reluctantly, but they'll say, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's easier to give up than to keep fighting for what you really believe in. It's easier to experience yourself as disempowered than to take ownership of the power and agency that you actually do have. It's easier to experience yourself as having no accountability than to take responsibility for your life. And they're nodding soberly and sort of like, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. But again, you've gotten a little bit of work done there. It's easier to hold on to the hope that your husband might someday change than to confront the reality that he probably never will. And again, excuse me, you're laying the groundwork for the middle game, the working through process proper and the optimally stressful interventions that will both challenge, thereby eliciting anxiety, and support to ease the anxiety. Okay, this is a good one. This is a good one. And when I supervise cases that are just really stuck, I often sort of almost cheat and kind of figure out it's probably going to be the I can't, you can, and you should dynamic that's creating the impasse, the transference, countertransference, entanglement between patient and therapist. So now I'll tell you one of my little secrets. And so here we go. For those patients, there are three parts, who experience themselves as so damaged from way back that they can't imagine being held accountable for their lives now. And these are called damaged for life and therefore not responsible now statements. I'll give an example in a moment. Who find themselves, therefore, looking, and that speaks to a distorted sense of the self as damaged, as not having. So that's distortion down below there. Who find themselves, therefore, looking to others to compensate them for the early on damage. So looking for external provision from the outside to compensate them. And now we call this an illusory sense of the object as having. And so these are compensation statements. And who, quite frankly, often feel that this compensation, either they say this aloud or they're just thinking it, that this compensation is their due. Entitlement statements, and this speaks to their entitled sense that getting is their right. And all of these are defensive reactions. We're going to highlight them. We go. You feel so damaged because of all the abuse you suffered as a child that you cannot imagine ever being able to do anything now to make your life better. And again, you're saying this to somebody, not just somebody randomly, but somebody who really has been protesting that it was so bad back then that, what are they to do? And so you're getting named this first of 3 parts. You feel so damaged because of all the abuse you suffered as a child that you simply cannot imagine ever being able to do anything now to make your life better. I say, yeah. When you're feeling desperate, as you are right now, compensation statement, you defensively find yourself wishing that someone would understand just how bad you feel and would do something to help ease your pain. Yeah, they say. And entitlement statements, because you feel that what your father did to you was so unfair, deep down you harbor the conviction that the world now owes you. You betcha, they say. Because your mother never understood you and left you so much on your own, you're now feeling that unless someone is willing to go more than halfway, then you're simply not interested. All right. Okay, so masochism statements. So again, people who know my writing about Relentless Hope, the masochistic defense of Relentless Hope and the sadistic defense of Relentless Outrage will be more familiar with this. And for those of you who don't know this, let me explain a little bit. So I don't talk about sadomasochism as being particularly relevant in the bedroom. I don't know much about that. I'm not really interested in that. Rather, sadomasochism as being they go together hand in hand, victimizer, victim, pairs of pathogenic introjects. And it speaks to a dysfunctional relational dynamic that will tend to get played out in many of their especially intimate relationships, sadomasochism. And at this point with my patients, we just say sadomaso and, all small letters and so on. And patients will say, I know I was being kind of masochistically hoping against hope and willing to suffer as long as I could keep thinking that maybe my husband or my wife or my child would come through, or my mother would come through, or you, the therapist, would come through. So masochism statements, what are they? For those patients who, because it simply hurts too much, refuse to confront and grieve the reality that the object of their desire will never change. Instead, they hold on to their defensive and relentless hoping against hope. Because it is so painful even to think about confronting the truth about your husband and his ongoing insensitivity to you and your feelings, you find yourself continuing to hope that perhaps if you try hard enough, are persuasive enough, persist long enough, and suffer deeply enough, then you might yet be able to compel him to change. Yeah, yep. And then I can eventually be saying, even you had so hoped that your husband, blah, 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 but you're beginning to realize that that's not really what he does, and it's devastating. So I'll be you see, I'm setting the stage and laying the backdrop for ultimately some middle game, model 2, optimally stressful disillusionment statements. Here's another one, masochism statement that will elicit little or no anxiety. And teasing out the players, because it hurts too much to confront the reality that your father will never be willing to apologize for all that he did to you when you were growing up. You keep hoping that if you try hard enough, persist long enough, and suffer deeply enough, then he might yet relent and be willing to acknowledge that he knows he caused you terrible heartbreak during all those years of his drinking. Now, let me say, to be able to formulate these statements, I mean, these right in front of you, sort of like, oh, yeah. But you really have to be listening so intently that you really have so entered into the patient's experience that you're able to articulate what they're really feeling. And then to name it, tease it out and name it and highlight it on their behalf. All right, hand in hand sadism statements for those patients who, in those moments, so it's more backdrop, the masochism, but in the relentless hope is backdrop. The masochistic defense of relentless hope is backdrop. Now we have the sadistic defense of relentless outrage, and we use sadism statements. And in those moments of dawning recognition that what they had so desperately wanted and felt they needed to have in order to survive is simply not going to happen. For those patients who are defensively prone to experiencing themselves as having been mistreated and or victimized. They will often then find themselves defensive, feeling that they either have no choice but to retaliate, but are entitled to retaliate. I've actually used this very sentence. I know I said I don't use the same sentence twice, but I've used this very sentence with several people, and they loved it. They felt deeply understood. When you feel that you've been wronged, you can get pretty ugly if you have to. And they say, you betcha. And they feel that you have understood. They don't just go around being ugly, like they're not psychopathic and tearing the wings off of butterflies or something. But when they feel there will have been some incitement, and when they feel that they've been, mistreated or victimized or misunderstood or abused, wronged, then they're going to fight back. By golly, they're going to fight back if they have to. When you feel that you're being mistreated, it makes you so enraged that you feel you have no choice but to lash back. When your mother is doing her usual, it hurts so much to be feeling so misunderstood that you find yourself thinking about what you can do to hurt her back. She should have to get a taste of her own medicine. Okay, now paradoxical interventions. Some of you will love these, and some of you are so going to be not into these that you're just going to, you can hardly bear it. But I'm going to do them anyway. So Jay Haley and others taught me a lot about paradoxical interventions, and I do use them for patients who are profoundly entrenched. For those patients who are deeply entrenched in maintaining same old, the conditioned, sobering reality of what is, the old, bad, disempowering, maladaptive narratives that are their Bible. Although the patient has been giving, say, lip service to wanting to change, it is clear from what the patient is actually doing that the patient is not, in fact, prepared to change. The therapist, therefore, lets go of her own need for the patient to change. That's a big one. And accepts, may involve some grieving, because often you have to get from relentless hope to acceptance, you have to grieve. So we might well have to sort of, take ourselves in hand and sort of like let go of your own need for the patient to get better, your own need for the patient to change. And in this William James College course that I teach in the fall, and we'll be teaching again this fall in October, that we talk a lot about the uninvested therapist. That, you get to be invested, but you need to be aware of being too invested in making the patient change. And there's always, for example, in you, and should be, in a therapist, just as the patient has conflict and tension inside of them, inside of us, the therapist, dialectical tension between, on the one hand, our vision of who we think the patient could be, were they but able to make healthier choices from our point of view, on the one hand, and on the other hand, our knowing that we really need and want to be honoring and respecting the sometimes unhealthy choices that they are making. And so which way do we go? Are we going to be challenging by highlighting what we think they should do? Or are we going to be sort of just, totally supporting what they are doing? And we need to be aware of therapeutic zeal, where we get too caught up in wanting the patient to change. All right, so for us to be able to pull off a paradoxical intervention and to do it right and well, you have to let go of your own need for the patient to change and accept the reality that the patient is not prepared to change, at least not for now, the temporal element. In essence, the therapist goes with the resistance by, in the words of Jay Haley, prescribing the symptom. I think I'm beginning to see why you feel that you cannot afford to trust anyone. Based upon what you've been telling me about the numbers of times your trust has been betrayed and your heart broken in the past, I can now understand why you feel that you simply might never want to open your heart again. Although it might mean being alone forever, at least you will know that no one will be able to hurt you ever again. So again, what you'll tend to do, and I'm going to give a few more examples on the next page, what you'll tend to do is you pick up on what they've been telling you. So you don't just offer it from sort of like, well, it would seem that, but rather based upon, or if I'm understanding you correctly, or what you would seem to be saying over and over again. And I think I'm finally getting it, that indeed, and then you go on to sort of name what their behavior is showing you, which is they are not interested in changing right then. In essence, the therapist uses her empathic understanding of the patient to offer her a paradox. So to the patient who, even after a year, has not been able to mobilize himself to update his resume, despite his proclaimed intention to do so, you say, yes, every single day you dread going to work, you hate your boss, and your job is incredibly tedious. But as you have said repeatedly, it does provide you with financial security and a sense of belonging. And you know this because you've been listening. So, and you weren't so caught up in wanting them to get their resume together so they can get a new job that they will enjoy, but you hear that it does provide them with financial security and a sense of belonging, which is hugely important to them. So I think I'm beginning to appreciate that at this point in your life, temporal element, perhaps it does not really make sense for you to be moving forward with applying for a new job. Perhaps at some point in the future, but not right now. And I remember way back when way back, so many decades ago, I was working at the Harvard University Health Services, and I saw a patient. We could only do sort of very short-term work. And she came in, and amongst other things, she had terrible insomnia. So I had been reading Jay Haley's stuff, and I decided that I was going to sort of try something. So I said to her, on average, how long does it take for you to fall asleep at night? And she said, well, not only does she have early morning awakening, but it usually takes her, oh my God, an hour or two even to fall asleep. I said, okay, well, are you willing to try something with me here? And she said, yes, I'm desperate. I said, well, this may sound a little strange, but I'm going to have you do something. And you got to do it for the next 7 nights. And then you're going to come back and tell me how it went. So I'm going to have you go to bed at your usual time, 11 p.m. But I want you to lie there for 2 hours, and you cannot fall asleep. I want you to lie there with your eyes open, and nothing, no TV, no nothing else, no music, whatever. But you just lie there for 2 hours, and do not fall asleep. So anyway, she came back in 7 days later, and I mean, I hope you guessed it. Sort of like she said, well, I'm sorry, I tried to do what you suggested, but it didn't really work because, I kept falling asleep, after 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So it's interesting where you prescribe the symptom, like stay awake then for 2 hours, and what that then can do. So here's a good one. To a desperately unhappy 45-year-old man married for 20 years. You hate it that your wife abuses you in all the ways that she does, and you stopped loving her years ago. But as you have often explained, as you've told me, when you start to think about how old and tired you feel, you find yourself thinking that perhaps it is simply too late, that the time to have left her might already have come and gone. Understood. And if the patient is made angry by the therapist's paradoxical interventions, then the patient's anger might well empower her, might well provide the necessary motivation or impetus for her to take action, if only to prove the therapist wrong. Okay, you would want or you would wish statements. Here the therapist, this is one of the final minimally stressful interventions. Here the therapist is giving the patient the benefit of the doubt, using a little bit of subliminal stimulation to highlight the fact that the therapist thinks there is indeed a healthy part of the patient that would want to be able to do a better job of managing things in her life instead of always sabotaging herself. Because the patient's ever busy sabotaging herself and tells you about all the ways in which she's not doing the things she knows she should be doing. Now, admittedly, with these statements, the therapist is leading the witness a bit by putting healthy words in the patient's mouth. But it is all being done with an eye to helping the patient access her own leading edge and her leading edge. Here we go. You would want to be able to forgive your husband, but you are just not quite yet prepared to do that. You would want to be able to get your taxes done, but you find yourself fighting it every step of the way. This is similar to a part of you and another part of you, but a little different, where you're really highlighting you would want, you would wish. You would want to be able to have a richer, more fulfilling life, but hold back from venturing out for fear of being terribly disappointed. And finally, you would wish that you could be more on top of your game, but you find yourself continually feeling overwhelmed and losing your way. Oh, empathic statements. I'm sorry, these are incredibly important. Sorry. These are also, designed to elicit little or no anxiety, but they're in a class of their own. They are minimally stressful, and they are allowed to elicit little or no anxiety in a class of their own. And they're my default mode and where I spend much of my time. And people who know my work know that I don't tend to ask questions, except a few. Like I might say, how would you want to use your time in here today, to someone who sometimes has a little trouble getting organized? Or I might say, do you think it's important that we try to understand why you are coming so consistently late? So I ask that question. Do you think it's important? As opposed to, well, okay, let's try to understand what the message might be here in your coming late so often. I don't want you to do you the disservice of missing it. We say, do you think it's important that we try to understand? You want to get the therapy, be ever tuned to the therapeutic alliance. You want both of you to be working on the same side. Those are questions, but most of what I do are statements. Here we go. Empathic statements. They're very powerful. Tease out and bring into focus, moment to moment, both the patient's affect and the narrative with which that affect is associated. Formulating these empathic statements requires of the therapist that she be attentively listening and empathically attuned to whatever the patient is experiencing in the moment or saying. The therapist's stance here is probably best described as one of having an agendaless presence, in the words of Daniel Goleman, and of being a mindful witness, in the words of Tara Brach. These empathic statements reassure the patient that she is being understood and that she is not alone. Now, they're experience near, not experience distant. In other words, they're targeting what's in the patient consciousness and not her unconscious. There's time for that later. These are what's in her consciousness, or maybe her preconscious, but her consciousness. They are designed to make explicit. Again, we're setting the stage, beginning game. Oh, they could be anytime. Sorry, they could be anytime. But they do also do a good job of setting the stage. They are designed to make explicit and give shape to the stories, the narratives that the patient, as a young child, had constructed in a desperate attempt to make meaning of her world, namely the relational deprivation and neglect, what I call the toxic absence of good or errors of omission, and the relational trauma and abuse, what I call the toxic presence of bad or errors of commission. And of course, both patients, all of us have all of those: deprivation, neglect, trauma, and abuse, but they get worked with differently in the treatment and in the transference, by the way. Okay, but to tease out and to give shape to these narratives that the patient as a young child had constructed in a desperate attempt to make sense of her world. The goal of these statements is to help the patient feel understood, not to help the patient understand. There's time for that later. But again, these statements will start to give shape to the filters through which the patient is interpreting her world. So examples: tease out affect and associated theme. It's hard to know where to begin when everything feels so overwhelming. That's an affect. Hard to know. That's an affect. Where to begin when, and here's the narrative, everything feels so overwhelming. And you can imagine that probably all sorts of everything feels overwhelming for her, not just where to begin in the treatment, but in her life. And that's a recurring theme and pattern in her life. It's uncomfortable to be here when you're not sure for sure the therapy is really helping anyway. You're terrified of being disappointed yet again. It's upsetting to be feeling this out of control. You're confused about how best to use your session. Do you see how you're sort of trying to get a lot of mileage here, connecting around their affect, which is very present. They're feeling their affect. And then the theme. You're confused about how best to use your session. You're just not sure, I said that, you're just not sure for sure that you have it in you to try again. You worry that if you were to let your husband know what's really bothering you, he would simply dismiss it. So do you see how you get a fair bit of stuff done when you say these empathic statements that tease out not just the affect? So you could say, I see how sad you are. And that's fine, but you can do a little more. I see how sad you are when you talk about your mother. Or you could say, I guess you could just say, your mother has caused you a lot of pain. That doesn't feel quite as, I guess that's a little empathic. But anyway, you could just say, not, well, I can hardly even do just the narrative because I'm so about teasing out the affect. So forgive me, I'm not going to do one that's just the narrative. All right, I take my cues from the patient and am therefore still empathic statements and am therefore generally one step behind her, not ahead, listening always with compassion and never judgment, with both head and heart to everything the patient is telling me. And yes, Ed, good friend, also with my body, my interoceptive attunement to how I'm feeling as I sit with the patient. So listening always with both head, heart, and in an embodied way to everything the patient is telling me, no matter how seemingly irrelevant it might appear to be, no detail too trivial to be ignored or forgotten. I will then offer these empathic statements that highlight what the patient is actually feeling right then and about what. Statements that often end with an implied question mark, whereby I am signaling that I am very open to having my rendering of things edited, corrected, or revised in order to make it a more accurate reflection of what the patient is actually saying and wanting me to know. And importantly here, the affect does not need to be a big dramatic emotion like anger, outrage, fear, panic, desperation, sadness, despair, disgust, horror, shame, guilt, regret. So when I supervise, sometimes my supervisees will say, well, they don't really seem to be feeling anything, but quite frank, or I can't really tell what they're feeling. But it could be a sort of understated something like that the patient's feeling a little confused or not knowing for sure, or feeling lost, or a little upset, or a bit concerned, or a little worried, or somewhat uncomfortable, or weary, or a bit burdened, or somewhat disappointed, or a little frustrated, or they would rather not, or they would wish. Those count as affects because that is where the patient is. All right, so finally, then we're going to go on to optimally stressful. This is one of my favorite slides with respect to the framing. So I always have to put this in. The framing of an empathic statement. I would like to encourage people instead of, I wonder if it's painful to be feeling so misunderstood, or it sounds as if it's painful to be feeling so misunderstood, or it seems as if it's painful to be feeling so misunderstood, or it must be painful to be feeling so misunderstood. You could simply say, it is painful to be feeling so misunderstood, followed by the implied question mark. Again, thereby signaling that you are very open to having your statement amended. And hello, Aizwan. I know it's like totally the middle of the night for you to be here, so thank you for coming. All right. I do my best to eliminate extra words at the beginning of the statement so that I can cut right to the chase. It breaks your heart that she doesn't seem to care. Extra words run the risk of putting too much distance between the patient and the therapist. All right, optimally stressful interventions, the middle game, as I had earlier indicated. Now we will alternately and repeatedly, right, repetitious and progressive, the ascending spiral staircase, an ever-evolving process. Be with the patient where she is, homeostatic attunement, and then direct her attention to where you would want her to go. Disruptive attunement. So here we go. All right, we're going to be talking about the 4 models. My CARE, C-A-R-E approach to deep healing: cognitive, affective, relational, and existential. And some have said experiential. You could almost maybe say experiential, although model 2 is also sort of experiential. So I think I'll stick with existential. So optimally stressful interventions are designed to generate destabilizing, growth incentivizing tension, stress, by juxtaposing, so 2 parts, there'll always be 2 parts, either directly or indirectly, explicitly or implicitly, verbally or non-verbally, anxiety provoking, at the end of the day, some kind of anxiety provoking challenge of the defense or the old bad narrative with anxiety assuaging support of the defense in order to create growth incentivizing mismatch experiences. And even think about EMDR, which I had learned way back in the 1990s. And I do a little bit, but I have to read off my sheet of paper to be able to get it right. But, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. And you're continuously juxtaposing the more analytic left brain with the more sort of intuitive and where the trauma may theoretically lie in the right brain. Present, past, present, past, present, past. So you're ever busy juxtaposing. And when I mentioned this, was talking about this to one of my supervisees who does hypnotherapy, and I said, wow, I'm really getting it, that it really is a juxtaposition. And he very respectfully, but he said, yeah, like, duh. So anyway, so some people have known this from way back, and Alexander and French certainly knew it when they were talking about the corrective emotional experience. All right, so here we go. So model 1, I'd said before, conflict statements, that's classical psychoanalytic. We're going to give some examples. Model 2, disillusionment statements, self-psychological. Model 3, accountability statements, contemporary relational. And model 4, facilitation statements, existential humanistic. Here we go. So model 1, conflict statements. These are really, really powerful. Here we privilege cognitive. And the prototype is, you know that. And after a while, patients themselves start saying, I do know that, but I find myself feeling. All right. You know that, comma, but you find yourself thinking, feeling, or doing in order not to have to. That's the skeleton structure of it. Goal, to facilitate resolution of that intrapsychic conflict by creating incentivizing tension between the patient's adaptive capacity, remember, adaptive response, adaptive capacity versus defensive reaction, defensive need. All right, by creating growth incentivizing, destabilizing, incentivizing internal tension and homeostatic imbalance between adaptive capacity for awareness, which will make them anxious, and defensive need to resist. But you resonate with them so empathically, first increase, then decrease, that by the time you're done, hopefully you still have your patient and you and they can continue forward. Here we go. I'm going to do numbers of them. So please just kind of relax into it and feel your way into it, if you could, please. You know that if you're ever to get on with your life, then you will need to let go of your conviction that your childhood scarred you for life. Now, by the way, I have to say, a little defensively, I have to say, you only say this to someone who really does know this. You don't just blurt it out to somebody where they certainly don't know this. And I mean, that's cheating. That's like, you can't do that. So you say, you know that, you have to name what they really do know. They don't like knowing it. They don't like to talk about it. It makes them very anxious, but they do know it. And the reason you can say this is because they've told you. So that's how you know it. You know that if you are ever to get on with your life, then you will need to let go of your conviction that your childhood scarred you for life. But it's hard not to feel like damaged goods when you grew up in a horribly abusive household with a nasty mother who kept calling you a loser. And you're kind of upping the ante here, and they can then either pick up on one side or the other. But again, you're not going to be fighting them because you're naming two parts that are inside of them. You know that ultimately you will need to confront and grieve the reality. So this is about grieving, but which you might think is model 2, but model 2 is when you're facilitating their grieving. And model 1 is when they're conflicted about grieving, conflicted about confronting the reality of their disillusionment. So here, model 1, conflict statement. It's a more cognitive, right? Freud, whatever, cognitive. You know that ultimately you will need to confront and grieve the reality that Juan, like your dad, is not available in the ways that you would have wanted him to be. And that until you make your peace with that painful reality, you will continue to be miserable. But in the moment, all you can think about is what you can do to make him love you more. I used that. The name wasn't Juan, but I've used that with the patient. You know that if your relationship with Alana is to survive, you'll need to take at least some responsibility for the part you're playing in the incredibly abusive fights that you and she are having. Okay, so it increases the anxiety there. But you tell yourself that it isn't really your fault, because if she weren't so provocative, then you wouldn't have to be so vindictive. And again, the fact that you understand the patient well enough that you can name this. So these are, you got to kind of work it. You really need to listen to understand both sides. So if they're wanting to come every other week instead of every week, or if they're wanting to stop treatment, you want to be able to do an effective conflict statement. You need to be able to have listened so well that you understand both sides of their ambivalence. I think I get to one of those in a moment. You know that I don't answer those kinds of questions, but you find yourself continuing to hope that I will. You know that ultimately you'll need to leave Miguel because he keeps breaking your heart, but your fear is that were you to let him go, you would simply not survive. You're coming to understand that your anger can put people off, but you tell yourself that you have a right to be as angry as you want because of how much you have had to suffer over the course of the years. You know that someday you'll have to let somebody in if you're ever to have a meaningful relationship. But at the moment, the thought of making yourself that vulnerable is simply out of the question. I think I have, okay. All right, so those are, yeah, okay. I think I'm going to move on. My eyes on the time. And I do want to allow time at the end for Q&A. So maybe be thinking about questions that you might have because I'm eager to answer them. Okay, model 2, then we do model 3, model 4, and then we wrap up. Okay, model 2, disillusionment statements. Okay, you had so hoped that, you had 3 parts. You had so hoped that, but you are beginning to realize that, and it devastates, enrages you. So there's that past perfect tense, that pluperfect tense about which I learned in 11th grade English. You had so hoped that. So you're naming, in essence, the relentless hope, but trying to kind of put it a little bit back there. But now we're coming up to the present. You are beginning to realize, now we're naming the reality of their disillusionment, their disenchantment, their disappointment. But you're beginning to realize that. And so the conjunctions are important, and it devastates and enrages you. So it's grief, of course, is about just both upset and anger. Although if it's too much outrage, then that means the person isn't really grieving yet. They're just outraged and they're fighting it. But if they're just really angry, that's okay as part of their grieving, or really devastated, that's all part of their grieving. And that's fine as they're trying to confront the reality of the object of their desires, a refusal to relent and to be all that they would have wanted the object of their desire to be. So the goal is to facilitate grieving by creating incentivizing tension between, again, juxtaposition, mismatch experiences by juxtaposing these 2 things, between defensive need to avoid confronting because it's too much, hurts too much, and adaptive capacity to confront, grieve, and accept. And parenthetically, my book that I wrote in the way I talk about it, one of the books called Relentless Hope, the refusal to grieve. And people always say, well, why don't you say the inability to grieve? So no. I'm about empowerment and sort of feeling that for the most part, people have capacity of some sort, but they might well be conflicted in using it and harnessing it. So I say the refusal to grieve. So I don't say you can't cry. I say perhaps at the moment you would rather not cry. So I want to highlight empowerment, accountability, et cetera, et cetera. That's just kind of the way I am. All right. So by creating, to facilitate grieving, by creating incentivizing tension between defensive need to avoid confronting and adaptive capacity to confront, grieve, and accept. 3 parts, as I've said repeatedly. First, but again, repetitious and progressive, hopefully. Each time I say it, becomes ever clearer. First, becomes even ever clearer to me. Anyway, first, highlight what had been, i.e. The patient's illusion, their defensive need for relentless hope, because they were refusing to confront and grieve the reality of the object's limitations, separateness, and immutability. So you're highlighting what had been their relentless hope. Then the second part, you highlight the reality of the patient's disillusionment, their adaptive capacity to confront the reality, little more cognitive there still, and then resonate empathically, this is more affective, with the pain of the patient's grief. In other words, their adaptive capacity to feel the actual heartbreak. Let's see. Oops. Okay, good. All right. You had so hoped that I would tell you what to do, but you're beginning to realize that I don't simply give you answers, and it infuriates you. You had so hoped that your daughter would reach out to you when you were sick, but you're beginning to realize that for now, you are not a top priority for her, and it's a devastating loss. You had so hoped that your husband would ask you how he could help with the dinner preparations, but you're starting to appreciate that offering to help with household things like that is not his thing, and it upsets and saddens you. I'm thinking about Jennifer Aniston, right, and Vince Vaughn or whatever, and she said she didn't just want him to do the dishes, she wanted him to want to do the dishes in that movie. But anyway, all right, you had so hoped that your mother would apologize, but you're beginning to accept that she simply does not hold herself accountable, which is both enraging and devastating. And again, you're going to be saying this again and again, as long as they hold on and have not yet let go. They are still repeating the holding on, and you get to repeat these kinds of statements, or you can convert back to model 1 and get it that they really are conflicted, and that they do know that ultimately they probably do need to grieve it, but for now, the thought of that is just too overwhelming, and they're not going to go there. So that's not somebody who's about to grieve. You had to go back to model 1 to sort of make sense of where they're at. You had so hoped that so you can change things around a little bit. You just want to kind of get each of the 3 parts said to make it most effective. You had so hoped that we could have a personal relationship, but you're coming to realize, albeit reluctantly, that a therapy relationship is not really about friendship per se, and that breaks your heart, right? I bet you could use that with some of your people, right? You would so have wished that I could know what you were thinking without your having to say it, but you're coming to see that it does not always work that way, and that makes you very sad. And again, as part and parcel of the grieving, when they really are grieving, will be not defensive introjection, as in pathogenic introjects, but rather adaptive internalization of those self-object functions that had been performed by the gratifying and empathic self-object. You were so hoping that I would not make the same kinds of mistakes that everyone else in your life has made, which is why it makes you very sad that I, too, have now let you down. It's good to sort of generalize it sometimes, so it's not just that they're focused on you and how you failed them, but you were so hoping that I wouldn't do what everybody else has done. Which is why it makes you so very sad that I, too, have now let you down. And finally, you had wanted so much for me to be able to make it all better. And it upsets you terribly that I don't seem to be able to make your pain go away. Oh, dear. Let's see. Oh, a few more. Please bear with me. And then we're doing model 3. You know that eventually you'll need to face the reality that your father will never change. And that breaks your heart because you had so hoped that he would. You're beginning to realize that your mother will never understand. And again, relentless hope isn't just something our patients have. It's something we all have. We all have this to different degrees. You're beginning to realize that your mother will never understand just how much she has hurt you over the course of the years. And it's absolutely devastating because you had so hoped that someday she might actually come to understand and apologize. As you begin to admit to yourself that probably Juanita will never be right for you, it makes you incredibly sad because you had so hoped that she would eventually come round to loving you. In those moments when you let yourself remember just how limited your father is and just how defensive he becomes whenever you try to hold him accountable, it feels totally overwhelming and hurts so much. You had so hoped that you could get him to take at least some responsibility for his abusiveness. All right, so model 3, the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory. So whereas model 1, privileged cognitive, model 2, privileged affective, model 3, privileges relational, the intersubjective in between, patient and therapist. Transference counter transference, countertransference entanglements, projective identifications, mutual enactments, co-creation of therapeutic impasses, and of course, Paul Russell's crunch situations. Dear Paul, may he rest in peace. The goal here is to bring the focus into the here and now of what's getting reenacted by the patient in the transference, to which the therapist, in her turn, is probably countertransferentially either reacting defensively or responding adaptively. So we want to bring the focus into the here and now of the in-between. And that was not our focus before. Model 1, the focus was on the patient's internal conflictedness and ambivalence. And in model 2, it was about their relentless hoping against hope that maybe someday, somehow, some way, if they were to try hard enough, they might ultimately be able to get the object of their desire to relent and to change. But now in model 3, in the intersubjective perspective, I'm sorry, I have some hairs stuck in my face here. This is so annoying. All right. I don't want to be annoying for you, so I just want to get it out of the way. All right. So model 3, we're focusing in on the here and now of what's being reenacted compulsively and unwittingly of the patient's unmastered early on relational traumas on the stage of her life, and understandably on the stage of the treatment. And inevitably, there's the induction phase of a projective identification and then a resolution phase. And in the induction phase, if you are indeed, as we hope you will be, semi-permeable, not totally permeable, but nor impermeable, but semi-permeable, means that you allow the patient's relational expectation of being failed, like the way she'd been failed early on. If you allow that to come into you and you take it on, some version of it, such that you end up being some version of the old bad. That's what we hope will happen, so that we can get access to the charged toxic boluses of bad, old bad, pathogenic introjects, internal bad objects in the patient's internal world. The bad, pathogenic introject bad, internalize good. Not internalizing good was model 2. Model 3 is introject bad. So these charged toxic pairs of pathogenic introjects, we invite the patient in model 3. We want to give the patient permission and space to deliver her pathology into the space so that we can bring to bear our own more evolved capacity to process and integrate toxicity on behalf of the patient who really does not know how. So now we can do any number of things. It's a little harder to sort of really say exactly what it is here, but the therapist may choose to share a number of things, something about her own experience of being in the room with the patient. Now, we wouldn't do that in model 1 or 2 or in model 4, or the therapist's own state of internal conflictedness as a result of something happening between them. And I'm going to give examples of all of these. Or the therapist's sense that she has been made to feel, that's the induction phase, in relation to the patient in the here and now, the induction phase of a projective identification, some version of what the parent must have felt in relation to the patient in the there and then, so that the patient has recreated with you the same dynamic that had characterized their relationship with the toxic parent, and you have become some version of the toxic parent. Or the inverse. The therapist shares her sense that she has been made to feel, in relation to the patient in the here and now, some version of what the patient must have felt in relation to the parent in the there and then. That's a little complicated. I'll give some examples here. But so the patient can either make you into the old bad parent, some version of it, or she can do unto you what had been done unto her, such that she puts you in the position that she had early on in relation to the toxic parent. Either one, and probably both, will need to happen by the time things are done. Okay. Accountability statements can be introduced in any one of the following ways. So in model 3 and just period, I really like to sort of throw myself under the bus. And I will bring myself in and I get to talk about myself. Whereas in model 2, when you're being empathic, you're not saying, I think I understand or I agree or whatever. In model 3, you get to bring your own subjectivity, your own authentic self into the space as a relational, as a self in relation. The Stone Center people used to call it that. And we are the intersubjective, two authentic subjects in relationship and trying to negotiate some kind of resolution at our intimate edge where accountability is going to be incredibly important. So I might introduce an accountability statement in any of the following ways, just so you get the idea here. It occurs to me that by way of your behavior in here with me, you are helping me to understand something that I had never before entirely understood. Do you see how you're giving dignity to their enactment? So rather than, oh, they're acting out, you're reframing it, you're recontextualizing it, you're repositioning yourself in relation to it. And in essence saying, it occurs to me that by way of your behavior in here with me, you're helping me to understand something that I had never before entirely understood. Or here even, I think that you've been trying to communicate something important to me that I'd been refusing to see. Or I wonder if my difficulty appreciating just how desperate you were made you feel that you had to do something dramatic in order to get my attention. You say to someone who just made a suicide attempt or is busy talking suicide. So it's really lending dignity to the patient's enactment. So here we go. The therapist might choose to share something about her experience of being in the room with the patient. So you could say, it would seem that I'm in the doghouse these days. I've said that to patients, that no matter what I say, it's not right. Or I wonder if the frustration and helplessness, restlessness. I wonder if the frustration and restlessness and helplessness I'm feeling now in relation to you is similar to the frustration and helplessness that you have spoken of having felt in relation to your father. Or this wonderful one from Christopher Bolus. You tell me something about yourself. I am just in the process of digesting it and storing it for further understanding of you. And then along you come, wham, and tell me that what I've digested and stored inside me did not come from you at all. The problem I find is how to live with the despair I feel occasioned by your disappearances. Okay, now Erwin Hoffman, this is so useful, has suggested still accountability statements, relational. If the therapist is aware of feeling conflicted in relation to the patient, she could choose to share the fact of this conflictedness with the patient. This is Erwin Hoffman. This is so useful. I want to tell you X, but I'm afraid that Y. Here the therapist is expressing aloud the conflict with which she's struggling, a conflict that might well be reflective of the patient's own state of internal dividedness. Here we go. I'm tempted to give you the advice for which you are looking. But my fear is that were I to do so, I would be robbing you of the impetus to find your own answers. Or I find myself feeling angry with you for being so often late and wanting you to understand how it impacts me. But then it occurs to me that it might be more important for us to try to understand what you might be trying to communicate to me by way of your frequent lateness. Or I'm tempted to respond to your request by saying that, of course, you can borrow one of the magazines in my waiting room. But I'm also realizing that were I simply to say, okay, we might then lose an opportunity to understand something more about you and perhaps about us. And then this last one I love. To a patient who says she wants the therapist's approval regarding her decision to terminate, a termination that the therapist thinks is premature. I am tempted simply to offer you the approval you are seeking. It is, after all, important that you do what feels right for you. But I'm also aware of feeling within myself that the time is too soon, and that were I to support your decision to leave, I might ultimately be doing you a disservice. It's fun to say that. I wonder if this feeling, here's some more. I wonder if this feeling I have in relation to you, that no matter what I say, it won't be good enough, is like the feeling you have spoken of having had in relation to your father, for whom nothing was ever good enough. And that's an instance of where you're suggesting, in essence, that she's doing unto you what her father had done unto her, but you're not quite saying it quite as blatantly as that. But I wonder if what I'm feeling is some cousin to what you've spoken of having felt in relation to your father. So you're saying indirectly, she's doing unto you what her father had done unto her. I find myself feeling so angry at your mother. I wonder if some of those feelings are actually more a story about feelings that you have about your mother, feelings you would rather not have to acknowledge. Finally, it occurs to me that we have managed to recreate in here the very same dynamic that characterized your relationship with your double-binding father. The feeling that no matter what either of us might do, it wouldn't get the other's approval. But all of this gives us an opportunity to experience firsthand how toxic the relationship with your father really was, except that now we can do something about it. Okay, the rule of three, one of my favorites. For the patient who has done a provocative enactment, this is still model 3, and a provocative enactment is something you get to decide if it's a provocative enactment. If you feel provoked, so it's good for you to be able to be in touch with your countertransference. If you feel provoked, it's a provocative enactment. All right, the rule of three, in order to compel the patient to take ownership of what she is playing out or enacting on the stage of the treatment, the therapist might ask the patient any of the following. 1, how are you hoping that I will respond? Which speaks to the id. And or 2, how are you fearing that I might respond? Which speaks to the superego. And or how do you imagine that I will respond? Which speaks to the executive functioning of the ego, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex of the brain. All three demand of the patient that she make her interpersonal intentions more explicit. Again, it's all about accountability and empowerment. Okay, model 4, we're wrapping up here. Facilitation statements. This is the existential humanistic approach to mending brokenness and easing relentless despair. And for patients who feel that they just don't belong, don't belong. These are specifically designed to highlight, with compassion and never judgment, the intense ambivalence the patient has about being authentically engaged with people. Again, it's from relational absence, the defense, to authentic presence, the adaptation, or from retreat to availability, accessibility, or using very big words, from nihilistic rejection, there's the R word, there's the defense, of existence, to gradually, incrementally, to existential acceptance, there's the A word, of its dualities, its complementarities, and its polarities. That's the more existential way of naming it. And with some patients, I work almost exclusively in that. All right, so anyway, so these facilitation statements express an appreciation for the complexity of the patient's experience of being in the world. And in speaking to different parts of the patient's self-experience, these statements honor the collage of selves that constitute the whole. I don't know if it's constitute or constitutes. I don't know, but whatever. I said constitute the whole. A part of you would want desperately to be seen and understood. But another part of you is terrified of being found. Remember, I talked about the need-fear dilemma. Donald Burnham's, can everybody mute themselves, please? Yeah, talking Donald Burnham's need-fear dilemma. A part of you would want to be able to trust me, but another part of you holds back for fear of being betrayed. Too many people have already broken your heart. A part of you is desperate to be able to feel that you belong somewhere, but another part of you is afraid even to hope that you might someday feel at home in the world. A part of you longs to find a soulmate with whom you would be able to share what most matters to you and with whom you would be able to spend the rest of your life. But another part of you is convinced that you will always be living in isolation and that you have no choice but to grow old alone. You're deeply appreciating their ambivalence about even being in relationship, in the world, engaged in life itself. The moments of meeting, they don't have those. The moments of meeting that really do give direction, meaning, and purpose to life. That's not something they experience much of. A part of you would want to be able to find something that would make your life feel more meaningful. But another part of you fears that it's simply not in the cards for you ever to find any real pleasure in life or any real joy in relationships. Finally, a part of you wants very much to get better and realizes that coming in every week probably gives you the best chance of making that happen. But another part of you is exhausted, discouraged, and not at all sure that you have it in you to keep trying. Okay, psychodynamic, we're wrapping up here, only a few more slides. Psychodynamic psychotherapy offers the patient an opportunity to revisit traumatic experiences that had once created the need for defense, but that can now be reworked such that there can be a different ending this time, an adaptive resolution. Let me explain. The heart of the therapeutic action involves judicious and ongoing use of, with the stage having been set by the minimally stressful statements, optimally stressful, growth incentivizing interventions strategically designed to generate mismatch experiences for the patient, the working through and resolution of which will require of the patient that she revisit experiences that had once been traumatic and to which she had therefore reacted defensively, but that can now, with the support of her therapist and by tapping into her internal reserves, be reworked, reenacted, retrieved, revisited, grieved, reprocessed, recontextualized, reframed, repositioned. All of those are RE words except grieved. We got to put the word grieved in there, such that she will ultimately be able to reposition herself in relation to the trauma, able now to respond adaptively instead of reacting defensively. Again, from rigidity, psychological rigidity, to psychological flexibility is our goal in deep and enduring, when deep and enduring psychodynamic characterological structural change is our goal. In other words, the patient will be returning in an embodied fashion to the scene of the original crime, but will now be able to negotiate in the context of a therapy relationship that will involve both the re-experiencing of old bad and the experiencing of new good, a different and better ending, an adaptive resolution. Because when you're giving these optimally stressful interventions, when you're saying them, that will stir the patient up, and she will inevitably start on some level gradually to ease her way back to getting closer to naming some of the traumatic stressors that had forced the patient to defensively react in the first place. But again, our focus was not specifically on that, but I'm just kind of saying that. All right, so just about the last slide here. In essence, psychodynamic psychotherapy affords the patient both impetus and opportunity, albeit belatedly, to master traumatic experiences that had once been overwhelming and therefore defended against. They were too much, but that can now, by virtue of the synergy between the therapist's loving support and the patient's innate capacity to adapt to stress, be revisited, reprocessed, and reframed, such that growth impeding defenses, once necessary for the child's survival, can be gradually transformed into growth promoting adaptations, stronger at the broken places. And my last two slides, Ernest Hemingway, and later Kelly Clarkson and many others. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In closing, I'd like to borrow from Stephen Mitchell a wonderful anecdote that captures the essence of the quintessential struggle in which all of us are engaged as we attempt to master our art. Mitchell writes, Stravinsky had written a new piece with a difficult violin passage. After it had been in rehearsal for several weeks, the solo violinist came to Stravinsky and said he was sorry. He had tried his best, but the passage was too difficult. No violinist could play it. Stravinsky said, I understand that. What I am after is the sound of someone trying to play it. As therapists, our work is exquisitely difficult and finely tuned, and often we will not be able to get it just right. Perhaps, however, we can console ourselves with the thought that it's the effort we make to get it just right that will ultimately count. Thank you, Stuart and his brother Stuart. And if you'd like to be on my mailing list, there you go. And I have some references. So that's it. That's it. So I'm eager to hear questions and thoughts from people. Please just unmute yourself or raise your hand and so on. And
yes, anybody just unmute yourself or raise your hand. Either way, we have just a few minutes.
And parenthetically, while you all are thinking, some of you, eventually, I had done the PDFs of these slides, and then more recently, I did some further updates. So there's something called updated slides, PDFs, and they will be forthcoming tomorrow or the next day. And you will also be getting my 18-page clinical interventions guide, which is some of which is still in my head, and the rest of which is in my computer. Oh, good. Yes, Barbara. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Barbara. Unmute yourself, Barbara. Maybe we can unmute her.
Is it unmuted?
Yes, yes, we're good. You're good.
Okay. This was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. It made me so tense. I was munching away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, I think.
It reenacted in me, and hopefully that I can be with my clients as in tune as you are with what you described, with the amount of enthusiasm that I have yet to experience in someone who gives, someone in our field giving a paper. Most of them put me to sleep. Now I don't know what to do with my energy. You're very energizing.
This one just made you eat a whole box of crackers.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Come
Thank you.
to New York. Look us up.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Okay. Somebody else here? One of my people, you don't want me to have to start calling on you, do you?
Gary? Unmute yourself.
Oh, good, good, good. I want to be able to see you. Yes,
go.
I want to be able to see you too, so you'll come to the front.
Okay.
Oh, Gary. Oh, hi, Gary. Oh, good.
Yeah. I just a couple of thoughts. I was thinking how this model works seamlessly with stage change theory, because it kind of gets people right where they're at and can just moves them to the next place. That was one comment. And the other comment.
I'm sorry. With it being understood that it is an ascending spiral staircase. So you evolve through, and I think you've even mentioned that before in that course you've taken with me. And we evolve through, awareness, and then action, and so on. And I talk about an ascending spiral staircase with intermediate landings along the way, such that there's repetitious and progressive. But yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah. The other thing lately I've been doing is kind of monitoring, modeling, positioning with the feelings that the patient is telling me about. So that I will,
Oh, yes.
I'll do it across from them so that they can feel it in themselves. It's just another
nice.
way to.
I love that. And Ed, good friend, he would love that as well. He keeps me on track about reminding us about the importance of embodiment and lived experience and bodily felt sense. And you're saying that as the patient's talking, you're living it in your body, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful,
It's an
Gary.
interesting because when you say it, it does it for them because you're kind of putting all the elements in your statements.
Yes. And I
And
feel it. That's what gets me. So when I'm saying this, blah, 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 I mean, I'm feeling it in my body, and then
exactly,
we feel it, and there's an empathic resonance back and forth.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Just one note about time. It is 8 o'clock. So anybody who needs to drop out or log off.
You can do it, and you still get your 2
absolutely.
CEs, and I won't be offended.
Yes. So,
But we
good
can
night.
run over
And
a little
everybody,
bit, can we?
Thank you
Lottie?
for coming. I can continue hanging out for a little bit.
Oh, good. For a little bit, please. Thank you. And I also want to thank some of you, I don't know if Aizwan heard me, but who are, it's in the middle of the night for them, and they are here, and I am very grateful. So I thank you very much. And maybe Ann Ruth, I don't know, maybe it's pretty late for you as well, and some of you others. So just thank you.
Thank you, Martha. It's been a wonderful presentation, and I get so much out of it.
Oh,
And
thank
it's so helped me with my, particularly with my supervisees. It has
Oh,
been
interesting.
Yeah.
Can you
it
say
has-
a little more, another sentence? Uh-huh.
I think in the state, particularly with the statements, you know, making an empathic statement and the power of that, and they're finding it so helpful.
Oh, good.
You know, that it's changed, I suppose, from coming from always asking the questions to making a statement.
Yes.
They
Well,
found-
because when we ask questions, we're asking them to give to us. Whereas
Yeah.
if we give
Yeah.
them a statement, then
Yeah.
we're giving to them instead of asking them to give to us.
And they're actually excited. I think part of your excitement in it is infectious, because they're actually quite excited now about thinking about making more empathic statements than
Oh,
you know, than asking questions, and it's really changed how they
Oh,
think about it. So thank you so much for that, because it's been a very powerful experience for me to be able to help students to see this so early in their training. So I'm really grateful.
Wow. Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Anne. And I appreciate you're pointing out something I hadn't even quite realized, that part of what enables me to be, and Gary was sort of intimating this as well, part of what enables me to be still, after all these decades, so excited about the work that I do is I just feel it in my body. Ed, you'd like that, right, Ed? I just feel it in my body, and I want to give. And most of us therapists, we really want to give. So, you know, and this isn't just about, as you obviously know, just give and gratify. It's so not about that, because it's about, you know, strategically leveraging their anxiety and saying some stuff that, quite frankly, you know, will make them anxious, but then, you know, countering with something to sort of bring the balance back. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
It's been a powerful experience. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now let's see. Oh, these are what, Dottie, thank you. I see something from the comment. So someone else to say something here, a question, or does Ingrid have a question, or someone else? Shelley, Andrea, Sylvia?
Yes.
Ingrid? Oh, and Ohio Dove, I'm so glad you're here. All right, go ahead, please. Shelley, yes.
Hi, Martha. I have had the privilege of being in seminars with you at the Cape for many years, and also at Smith. And I just want to thank you so much for, this was so incredibly powerful and re-energizing for me, especially the accountability statements. I have found that very helpful and use it all the time. And I also wanted to say that you did not put me to sleep, but my dog nodded off and loved it. So thank you.
Oh my God, that is very sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is very sweet. Thank you for that, Shelley. I thought you looked very familiar to me, so thank you for introducing yourself.
Yes, you're
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you.
Martha, paradoxical intervention that put the dog to sleep. You can't hear me.
I
Martha,
can hear
can
you.
you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Yeah. No, it was just a wisecrack of mine.
Oh,
About the paradoxical intervention that helped this woman fall asleep. You told her not to go to sleep, so
Oh, yeah,
she fell asleep. Yeah. Lottie, are you going to give us the code?
I don't know what code you're talking about. We will send out an evaluation form either tonight or tomorrow.
Oh, okay,
And you
maybe
have
it's
to fill out the
maybe it's a
evaluation
different-
form in order to get the CE credits.
Oh, okay. With social work talks, there's a code that's usually given. I'd like you,
Okay.
Lottie, I'd like you to make a note that Brett Schlossberg attended this workshop with Martha. Okay,
So
because I'm
iPad
still
2
iPad 2.
is Brent.
Brett, B-R-E-T-T.
Yep.
Schlossberg, SCHLOSSBERG.
Got it.
Thank you.
Oh, good. I see that Cameron, something about, you mentioned having feelings about interpretations. And by the way, Lottie, can we save the chats so that I can have those and answer any questions we don't deal with? I would appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, Cameron, you mentioned having feelings about interpretations or that language. Could you speak more to that? I've been learning a lot about, clarifications, confrontations, and interpretations, and would love to hear more about how you conceptualize those interventions. You know, that's so good. And I do call them minimally stressful clarifying statements, don't I? And was it Frida from Reichman or whatever who talks about the sort of 5 different things? And I learned those way back, and then I kind of have forgotten since. Let's see, confrontations and interpretations. I think that what I have chosen to do, because I don't myself resonate with what I know is presented often: clarifications, confrontations, interpretations, support, and there's one other thing or something. I just want to say interventions. And I don't mean we do a drug intervention or they're drinking alcohol or something, but just interventions. So I guess I don't have any. I'll think some more about that, Cameron, and see if I come up with something more interesting there. Because interestingly, my next book was supposed to be named The Art and the Science of Interpretation. And yet I don't even mention interpretation. So that's theoretically a problem. So I better get my act together if I'm really going to make that the title. And to say the art and the science of intervention, that sure doesn't sound right. So I think I better get myself together here. So thank you, Cameron. I'll think more about it. Thank you. All righty. Well, I'll tell you just, and Aizwan, thank you. And again, Aizwan, I just love it that you're here. You say you love the rule of 3. I'll remind people of something I've said in the past, but this is an example of where I use the rule of 3 to advantage. So I was working with a patient, and could people mute themselves if they're not actually, whatever would be good. So I was working with a patient ahead for a long time. And at the end of the session, which I thought was a good enough session, as she's leaving, she says, "Oh, by the way, I won't be coming back for a while." And I, taken aback, like, oh my God, you know, what am I supposed to do here? But then I remembered my rule of 3. So I figured I would try to get some supervision from her. So I said, "How would you want me to respond to that?" Figure get supervision. And she said, "Oh, you'll probably just say, 'Come back next week and we'll talk about it.'" So I said, yes, come back next week and we'll talk about it. So she came back the next week and we did talk about it. And we worked together for another several years. So there you go. Oh, good. You love the statement about being a step behind the patient, not a step ahead. Oh, yeah. I'm so glad, Deborah Allen, that you like that. Yes. And now, Ingrid, you have something you wanted to say? You're unmuted, so I can hear you.
I'm not sure. Are you talking to me?
I am. To you, Ingrid, I am. Lovely Ingrid with the headset on.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, I'm just very impressed by your presentation. And I'm looking forward to reviewing everything. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ingrid. I guess I get to say I will be in the fall, and some of you have already taken this course, in the fall through the Center for Psychoanalytic Studies at William James College. I present a 1 month long intensive something on Model 5. Some of you have taken that, and you get 18 continuing education credits, and it's very intense.
Yeah, I would love to take it. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Well, I'll keep people apprised.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Martha, thank you. I'm going to sign.
I'm
Thank you
here.
very much, Martha,
Oh,
for a
about-
great presentation.
I'd also like to know about the longer workshop that you're giving.
Oh, okay. Yes, Barbara. Yes. And Ingrid, I will. Thank you. I will. If you're on, yes, I will let you know, Barbara and Ingrid. Yep. Thank you. I will. And thank you for your interest. All right. Well, listen, I realize
I just wanted to make one comment, Dr. Stark.
Julie. Yeah, Julie.
yes,
Julie. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to thank you. I found tonight's presentation to be particularly empowering for me, to help me think of myself as a less tenuous practitioner.
Oh.
Yes, to be less
It was
tenuous.
empowering, you said. Oh, I see.
Yes, when you were saying to be more direct in our statements.
Yeah. It's a paradoxically, because even as you're sort of saying, it would seem that a part of you at this point in time, but then you get to say it. So you're paradoxically couching it. And meanwhile, though, you're saying something quite powerful.
Right.
And
Right.
direct.
Right. But also not to be saying, I think I'm hearing that you are feeling blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, right.
You are feeling.
Yes.
Go ahead and give myself permission to just say, you
Just
are
say.
feeling. Yeah.
And what you can do is, and the way we say, and we can look away a little bit, and we say, so the feeling of just terrible sadness, or I see how sad you become as you think about your mother and how she never understood. And you end it with ... an ellipsis, which is an implied question. So we're really tentative when we say it. So we don't say, and I know you know this, we don't say, you're sad when you talk about your mother. We are just getting it. So we want it to be that we are just in the moment, really sort of registering it and getting it, that just the sadness, it goes so deep. And I want them to look at me, and I'm looking away, so I'm not like looking right at them, and so that they can then feel it in their body. Gary, yes, and Ed, right? They feel it in their body, and I'm feeling it in my body, the sadness, and I feel it. I mean, I love to connect with people. And I mean, I've sort of cleverly figured out that by being a therapist, you get paid to do it. You can really connect and you can give. I mean, I love to give. I mean, I didn't emphasize that third part, the no stress interventions, where we celebrate and applaud the patient's adaptive resolutions that are often accompanied by, thank you, yes, Julie, a very satisfying click of recognition when patient and therapist get it. That's sort of like, yes, we've arrived at something and it feels good. At least for now, we've arrived at one of the landings of the ascending spiral staircase. And we get to give, but it's in the literature, we never talk about applauding the patient or applauding us, they and us, them and us, and giving ourselves credit and feeling good about what we've done. And I like to do that. This is one of the privileges of getting older, and longer in the tooth. You start to be able to just do stuff that, when you were younger, perhaps you weren't quite as comfortable doing. So. Okay. Oh, thank you. These statements are just beautiful. And Lauren, thank you so much. And Jacqueline and whatever.
How does this work?
Yes, Kate, yes.
Yes. So I have been thinking about this, but your statement just really brought it to the forefront. In the early 70s, when I first began in this sort of neck of the woods, I was working for a crisis center, and they were training us with, God, who's the guy? The empathic guy, I'm blanking.
Anyway,
No, gosh, no.
Ernst Wolf.
Pardon?
Ornstein.
Rogers.
Ernst
It
Wolf.
sounds like you're feeling. He interviewed,
Les
Gloria-
Havens.
no, Gloria. Remember Gloria had 3 therapists and she,
Carl
God, it
Rogers.
sounds like I feel like I'm
Oh,
doing-
Carl
Pardon?
Rogers.
Carl
Thank you.
Rogers, yes.
Carl
thank you.
Rogers.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Anyway, when you start, you get this paper that says, sounds like you're feeling, I wonder if, like a cheat sheet. And then you get the caller on the, on the crisis line. And I remember I just had that sheet in front of me and I didn't know what I would do without it, but I needed that to sort of get me going, and give me a language and locate me. And so this presentation tonight, it's just very meaningful because I see my journey, I see how things have unfolded and the richness of the material that you have given us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you. And I'm looking at a comment here and I want to say to Jim Amundsen, I did indeed talk about Al Peso. And yes, the witness would say, I see how. So yes. Thank you. Al informed my thinking majorly. And I adored Al, as I know you did, Jim. We all did. We all did.
Great.
Oh, and
I would sort of second Deborah's comment about loving the nuance of language, just how a subtle change in wording can just be so effective.
make all the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are at 8:15. Maybe one more comment and then we wrap up.
Right. And again, you'll give me the chat because I want to be able to answer people more directly. So people, please know if you have questions or anything, please email me. I love moments of meeting, as I think I've sort of clarified now 20 times over. So Martha Stark, MD at hms.harvard.edu. And it is true that I have some other email, but the one that I want you guys to have is hms.harvard.edu, Martha Stark, MD. So email me with questions or thoughts. I'm yours.
We'll send out your email address with the evaluation form. Then
and the updated PDF, so that'll get sent out.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I want to thank Lottie and then Liz. Many of you interacted with Liz and the wonderful somebody in the back office who made it all possible. And Lottie, who just so grateful for this opportunity, Lottie, to present to these good people. And you framed it in a way that was really very sweet and loving. And it created it started it for me and it felt really wonderful. And I thank you for that.
Well, you're a long time sort of faculty of MAP, so it's great to have you back.
Thank you. Yes, I was at MAP for years. Yes, I was.
Right. On that note, I'm going to end the recording with a big thank you for Martha. So stop recording.
Go like this.